please go into my webpage and actually go into the living posters, because just as Maureen was saying that the NERI posters, will be updated. Here you can get into people who are initially sharing their living posters. This is how you do it here. You can go in, how to create and share your living poster. It's for people who want to get underway, want to share what they're doing, and you can actually get into these. You can go into the NERI one. There are some of the details. You can get into Maureen's, Mary's, Bernie's, Catriana's. You can actually get into these and actually look at where people are talking about what it is they're actually doing. So there is the living poster, which I do hope you'll, excuse me, get into and contribute your own. Now, those are the living posters for people who become a bit more advanced and who actually want to share their explanations of educational influence. Do please go on to the Educational Journal of Living Theories. And it may be, I know that Maureen wants Marie Huxtable, who's the chair of the editorial board, maybe to see a few words about that later, but you can get into the Educational Journal of Living Theories. You can actually get into the latest issue of it on transformative teacher education, about a cooperative living educational theory, and that's in Bangladesh, the Bahamas, in Nepal. So you can just see what people are doing around the world in terms of living educational theory. But I'm saying that NERI is at the forefront of that in terms of that community-based and the relational dynamic of your values. And it's that I'm encouraging you in terms of the NERI meets to research those and actually go public on that relational dynamic in community between you all, because you're sharing amazing living values, your unique constellation of values. So it's having that confidence that each one of you has got that contribution that you can make. Now, could I just now stop sharing screen just for a moment? Now, I'll go into the chat. Now, could I just give you a minute? If anybody wants to actually post anything in the chat from what I've just been saying that I can respond to. But as I say, I'll just give you, you've introduced yourselves. They're all in the chat. Now, just going to these new messages. Let me just go into those. Yeah, so Mary's, that's Mary wrote. Maureen also talks about the role of dialogue and the web of betweenness in her work. And then see the publications, because as I look now at this screen, and you've all got access to that, I hope I'm making sense by the web of betweenness with those values. I know Judy in Canada has worked with groups to create dialogic forms of representation using a really interesting representation of how groups can actually work together in community to produce narratives, including a range of different voices. Yeah, I agree there. And that's Mags about that sense of, it is, I know, because I don't feel that's, I understand that sense of loneliness, but I suppose that feeling of hope that I get from that, it is a flow of energy, and I'm experiencing it today because it is grounded in the NERI community. But I also get that feeling from a cosmological energy, which is life affirming. But I understand that point about the education and the loneliness, and it is very much a good foil against loneliness when working away at home. That sense of being able to share this kind of energy, and that's why it's always such a pleasure, and I'm delighted when I'm invited to speak in relation to groups of committed educators and researchers, because I get that feeling of, again, it's a tremendous flow of energy, which transcends any kind of loneliness of working on one's own, because with living educational theory, you're definitely not working on your own. You're drawing on insights from a range of different people. Now, I'm really pleased that Sandra and inspiring us to think about your educational influence. Now, and that you're using your reflexive journal as a basis for further research. Now, remember that Sanja is talking from Croatia, where some of the original work was done by Branko Bunker and others. And there's a beautiful paper in the first issue of EJOTS in 2008 about children becoming actual researchers of their own learning as they reflect and evaluate what they're doing. And these, I think, are 10-year-olds that are actually demonstrating they can do it. Joy Mounter has got 6-year-olds going through, and it's being videotaped, going through the reflective process where they actually look at their own learning. Now, I agree with Clive that the Neary meet is unique. And it says, no coincidence that the Irish excel at that, a real feeling of warmth within the group. So do please, it's not being jingoistic or nationalistic, it's actually recognizing that Irish culture has evolved in a way that can actually bring something really important in the world and the way you relate to each other through that warmth and the dialogues. And in my presentation today, you can access on the web. I also recommend you go into a PhD about Ubuntu in Africa, because Ubuntu looks at I am because we are. There are researchers from Hawaii that talk about aloha, like the quality of aloha in that relationship between people. Okay, Ariana Briganti looks at the values and her living theory of international development, a commitment to that global context. So again, I agree with Judith, and that I do think that there is value in solitude, a reflective space wherein one might constitute self and one's contribution to intimate and community educational relationships. Now, I've never associated solitude with loneliness. You know, for me, solitude can be, if you like, really energizing through that critical reflection that you can actually express. So I do think that's a really important point. Now, Mary's, I would be interesting to hear the comparative word in other languages. And that's where this notion of colonization is very important, that we've got to be very careful not to colonize. And that's why I emphasize in my paper the values of from other cultures, like in Hindu culture, from within Nepal. There's a beautiful word that talks about harmony from Pabati Dungana. So do please, if you like, have a look at that and just see if they resonate with you. Now,
it actually, sorry to interrupt, Jack, it actually might be a nice time. We're going to go into groups to continue the conversation and then come back to the plenaries whenever, or if you think it might be a nice time to talk in little groups to maybe extract more information or more dialogue.
No, very, very much so. You know, so that's fine, Cornell. There's one question there about where to start. And I'll just mention this. I think if you're interested in where you start, you've already probably started because you're asking the question, how do I improve what I'm doing? Now, there is your start. But yes, please, Cornelia, let's get into the groups. You know, I think you've got questions there and we'll meet up, you know, in about half an hour, I think. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I think Maureen wants to just say a few words and then we'll hop into groups.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you very much to Jack for that. I suppose very broad and all-encompassing input, and I suppose you've given us loads of food for thought. And so we will go into our groups now. I think, Jack, did you want us to address specific questions when we go into our groups? Would I be right?
To be honest, I think if anything has stimulated you in terms of the questions, then raise those and tackle them. But the other one is, how do you know that anything you've done has influenced the education of anybody? You know, there's one. How do you know? And then the other one relates to your values. How might you express and represent the values you use to judge improvements in practice? But please go with what stimulates you. You know, go for your own questions rather than ones that I've given you. Yeah.
Brilliant.